All right, it's 6 a.m. Drinking my third cup of coffee. Although to be fair, my coffees are probably double strong, so this is probably my 6th cup of coffee. And anyway, we're coming in with a little gait analysis video. So first thing we're going to do is just watch in real time to get a sense of anything, like any big standout things stand out. So there might be 1 or 2 things that just really grab your attention. Other than she just kind of stepped on an awkward part of her deck there. There is some interesting stuff just showing up in real time watching this video, not even slowing it down. So I'm super intrigued. Maybe I'll point out 2 things in this. Oh, she's doing many laps. Amazing. This is my first time watching this, by the way. Yeah, there's 3 things that are grabbing my attention right away without even trying to look into the details. So I'm using a bit of a peripheral vision, not a focused vision for my first time looking at this. So I want you to look at her right arm. Oh, she's doing so many laps. Amazing. Right arm or maybe this video is looping. I think this video is looping. That's cool. So let's look at her right arm and just her rib cage in general. And look how it appears to be a bit down on the right side. Even the creasing through her t-shirt, it just looks like her rib cage is shifting and leaning towards the right, and perhaps even rotating only to the right and not to the left. Yeah, right, center, right, center, right, center. So we already can see she might have a little bit of what we call in anatomy in motion, or even in osteopathic stuff, a type 2 spinal mechanic, in which she's side bending and rotating only to one side here. But we'll have to look into that a little further. But the other thing that stands out is watch her left leg. Swings around, swings around. It's as if I'm questioning how well she can actually get her pelvis and her mass to commit to her left leg. Because this swinging the left leg around strategy, I often see that as a way of, oh, it wasn't a loop. This is actually, oh, amazing. She's going to stand and give us some posture angles. That was like a little morning walk. I got in her 10,000 steps just there. Well, that's cool. Okay, well, we can work with this. Let's just back up. How do I get back to her standing there? Just want to see you stand. Oh, come on. Come on. Come on. There it is. Okay, let's just take a look at how she is standing. Bear with me. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. That's a front view. There we go. Okay. Oh, it's not a perfect front view. That's okay. We'll start with the side. So we just repeat her side by side. Just forward. Just chilling out. Okay, cool. So when we're using anatomy and motion as a method of interpreting the way someone's inhabiting their body, is we generally start with our best interpretation of how they're statically set up, so their posture. What I'd like to invite you to observe here is her sagittal plane alignment. And for me, what stands out is her pelvis seems quite posteriorly tilted. I have a little sense that she's slid forwards with her pelvis. We can kind of see that in the angle of her thighs here. But I also know that this particular woman is very aware of her alignment. And over time, I think she's become a little bit more attempting to stand more optimally. So I think that if we were just to see her kind of chilling out when she didn't know she was being filmed, I think we'd see a lot more of this pelvis forward, possibly a rib cage pushed back kind of posture. But that's initially what stands out here. And she turns to the back view. Interesting, interesting. This, right foot. Now, if you had to choose, this is so interesting. If you had to choose which leg, it looks like the middle of her pelvis is more sitting on top of, which leg would you pick? Me personally, I see a little shift with her pelvis to the right shift. Like more of her pelvis is on top of her right leg. I also have the sense from this view that she has a bit of a rotation left in her pelvis. So a shift to the right, a rotation to the left. And if you just extrapolate that, that would set her up in a position where it'd be much easier and likely for her to put her right foot forwards. When the right leg goes forwards, when we're stepping, that should, in theory, well, not in theory, it should mechanically rotate your pelvis to the left. And it looks like that is how she is kind of standing. However, it's like her feet are trying to do the opposite. If her pelvis is rotated to the left, then it's like her lower legs are rotated to the right. It's tough to say definitively, but what I have the sense of is that her right knee looks a little more flexed. So a little more bent, and just by the angle of like the knobbly bit on the inside, it looks to be a bit more internally rotated in that femur on the right. And an internal rotation in the femur will unlock the knee to flexion and will leave the tibia appearing to be a bit more externally rotated, which will leave us with that foot looking to be pointed out. So it looks like we have a setup with a right leg that is pronation from the hip kind of down to the foot, with her mass shifted onto her right leg. Even her spine set up, she looks as if she's in a bit of a right lateral flexion with her spine, which is also part of our whole body pronation mechanic. So pronation being when you, as a whole body thing, when you step onto for example, her right foot, we'd see this cascade of joint actions in which we'd have this leg structure, the pelvis rotating to the left, and then this spine doing this lateral flexion to the right. So we can kind of see she's quite biased to being in a bit more of a right leg forward, right leg pronation, whole body pronation when her right leg goes forward. But willing to be proven wrong on that as we watch more of her move. These are just some initial impressions. Also, just note how her head seems to be rotated to the right. Love when people have ponytails because they really indicate, unless you put your ponytail on crooked. Oh, she's going to show us another side view. Yes. Yes, we see. Hey. It's a bit more evident from this side as she's standing that her pelvis is shifted forwards. She has a bit of a posterior tilted pelvis. Remember that she looks level with her pelvis, but remember a level pelvis is actually a posterior tilt. This is cool. We can see her knees. Interesting. So I wonder if she has actually yeah, we can see her left knee sticking out from behind her right knee. So that is showing us that her right knee here, more anterior, is a bit more flexed, and with her left knee poking out posteriorly, her left knee is a little more extended. So that's confirming what we saw from the back view. So she is kind of biased to have left knee extended, right knee flexed. And if you wanted to stand up and try it, if you haven't already tried this, if you flex one of your knees, it should push your pelvis in the opposite direction. So a right knee flexion should push your pelvis into a left, on knee, left rotation. Right knee flexion, left pelvis rotation. All right. Oh, and she's finally giving us the front view. Amazing. Sweep to her toes, good on the ground. Amazing. Okay, again, we can kind of see this right shoulder lower, right arm seems to be a bit floating away from her body. A little higher on the left. And yeah, you can see this shift to the right. And do you see this little bit of right in there, that creasing in her t-shirt? To me, that little bit of creasing, bunching there, it looks like a crease in her hip. And that creasing in her hip is like a flexion in her hip, which again kind of tracks with the idea of a pelvis that is rotated to the left, a little bit shifted to the right, and actually a bit of a bend, that right knee pushing her pelvis to the left, but also the bend in the knee and the pelvis rotating to the left will flex her right hip just in her static posture. So that is very cool. I'm just looking at, the that left shift, or sorry, right shift with her pelvis, but is she shifting her rib cage to her left leg? I'm not sure. Anyway, I think it would be nice now. Oh, she's doing it again. You are so amazing. Okay, yeah. So uh, let's just fast forward through that. I want to actually look at her walking, breaking down some phases. Okay, there we go. Let's go back. Sorry, so awkward. Back to the beginning. Okay, so let's put her through a couple of footsteps. We'll start with a more clear. So we'll start with her right heel strike. I don't know why, but I always like to start with heel strike just to make it systematic and kind of standard for me, the way that I begin this process. Cough. Okay. So coming into a right heel strike. And again, the first time we go through this, it's tough to say anything about the first phase because we have nothing to compare and everyone's a little bit different, but there are some ideal things we'd like to see. For example, we'd like to see a pelvis that's level. We'd like to see a pelvis that's getting over to her right leg. And I don't know if that's happening, but we'll have to compare it to the other side. We'd like to see a spine that's laterally flexing away from the direction the pelvis is going, from the front leg. I don't think we're really seeing that. There's not a whole lot of side bending in her spine. We look at her front foot. We're looking to see a heel strike with a supinating foot. Again, have to compare it to the other leg, but I am not too sure we can call that a supinating foot. We don't really have contact on the outside edge. And we know that just at standing, her right tibia is a bit externally rotated and we can see toes sticking out the side. So I don't know if those mechanics are quite there for supination in her right foot, but let's move her along into the next phase, loading phase, where the foot pronates, aka suspension. And I'm looking to see her toes get onto the ground. So you can still see she has a toe sticking up there. And finally, they go down there. So this is interesting. Very interesting. So we can see, just rolling through that, we can see that left rotation in the pelvis happening here. But what's I think of most interest is the timing of her front and back legs. In this moment in time, yes, we want to look at the front foot as getting into its pronation, but the back leg is part of this phase. It's a whole body. It's two legs in one phase. So it's not just a front leg phase, it's a back leg phase. And what's this back foot doing? It's completely off the ground. Where would we like it to be? We would like her back leg to be there. We'd like her back leg to be there when her front leg foot is in pronation. But when her front, because this is our 2 points of contact on the back foot, which gives us the proper supination mechanics to propel off of, to slow down her journey into her front leg so she doesn't just crash land into it. But when we actually see her toes get onto the ground, which is our qualification for when pronation is there, foot completely off the ground in the back, meaning she doesn't have a propulsion phase happening at the right time. She's not synced up. So there's a lot more, I want to say, just strain going into the right side because she doesn't have this leg to decelerate anything. I'd be curious about where are her adductors and hip flexors on her left leg? Can they eccentrically load? So it wouldn't surprise me, and I'm pretty sure it's her right hip. I don't remember much of her history or what her current complaints are, but I know she has one hip that she's trying not to have a hip replacement on. It wouldn't surprise me if, just based on this, that right hip was getting smashed into too much. Okay, well, let's take note of that spine, side bending to the right, and this arm kind of abducting out to the side. And shall we move along? Putting her into transition phase. And I'm going to put her feet next to each other. As we go from, it's a very small phase, actually. Her pronation phase, I mean, if her foot was down, her pronation should start here and then end here. But her pronation phase is so short because this is where she pronates, if happening at all. And this is where she should start to then supinate. So it's really, she's given herself, or she hasn't given herself. Life has conspired, all the forces that be have conspired to give her this very small window of opportunity to pronate, which is not really happening. And here she's still in this spine right lateral flexion. A little bit of a hike, shift, and a left rotation with her pelvis. So she is still holding that right suspension phase, pelvis and spine, when she should be entering a mid stance where everything is neutral. And this foot ought to be pronating. Now, I just think it's curious how close her feet are to each other. Like, have you ever done that? Like walked and then kicked yourself in the other foot? I do that all the time. So now I'm thinking about what if this is me too? But I wonder if she ever gets bruises on the inside of her right foot because she keeps kicking it. Anyway, this is just one footstep. We'll have to look at others for consistencies. But she's quite loaded into that right hip right now when she should be starting to almost like poof up against gravity and get out of that really deep weight bearing that we do in suspension. Anyway, let's move her along. So now her left leg is swinging into late swing. And we want to see her right heel lifting. She shifts her pelvis, ooh, or doesn't shift her pelvis to the left. Look at that. Boom. That is an interesting moment to observe. So in this particular phase, do you remember when we looked at her right leg forward? There was roughly a level pelvis, and here we have a hike on the right. We have, it looks to be her pelvis is still rotated to the left, and her pelvis is still sitting more over her right leg. So she's still got that right suspension phase mechanics in her pelvis and her spine, even though she's supposed to be getting her weight committed into her left leg for heel strike at this time. And this arm really showing us it wants to swing out to the side. Interestingly, both arms are kind of behind her right now. I catch myself doing that sometimes too. You know, when you're kind of walking uphill or something, or you're trudging pretty slowly against resistance, and you kind of walk and both your arms swing back at the same time. Like you're using your torso to push forwards and then your arms push backwards. And it's not this oppositional gait. It's like this forwards chugging homologous gait. It almost looks like she's using that as a strategy to heave her body into her left leg. So everything kind of is pointing to me that this left leg, she's, I don't know, something maybe have happened and she's not able to get her weight there, or something is just set up for her to prefer to stand in this right hip. I'd want to ask her either if there's something that happened on her left side that doesn't feel safe for her to move there, or if there's a good reason why she wants to stay in her right side like this. What is that reason? Questions. We can't really see her left foot and the quality of the heel strike because it's crossing around. And this again is that common strategy of when we can't get our pelvis to actually shift over to a leg to adduct it, then we might have to swing the leg around like a tightrope to get it in front of our bodies. And let's roll her through and see what actually happens when she enters her full weight bearing on the left leg. So her suspension on the left. Wait for her foot to get into pronation, probably about there. And we can still, right about there, but still moving there. Okay. So she gets out of her right hike with her pelvis, but she doesn't really get into a left hike. So we're kind of missing left hike. We're missing, whoops. We're missing a left shift. Oh my goodness. Oh, shift. And can we see which direction her pelvis is rotating? Does it rotate to the right and her left foot pronates? I don't think so. She's missing that right pelvis rotation. So we can kind of see this situation where we might consider her right hip. If it's shifted, if her pelvis is shifted to the right, then she's stuck with a right hip. Oh my goodness. Adduction. we have this pelvis rotated to the left, we'd have to investigate how her hips are able to move in the transverse plane, because it looks like she has a left femur that's internally rotated. So if you have a pelvis and a femur that are both rotating the same direction, it's kind of a neutral hip. So I question if she can actually rotate through her hip in the transverse plane. And then with that persistent hiking on the right hip, she also has a double adduction. So you can say she's got a double hip adduction, and then a neutral hip in the transverse plane. And then by virtue of the knee being more flexed and the pelvis rotating to the left, we could call that right hip also flexed, so closed at the front. And so we probably are seeing quite a bit of compression in that right hip. In general, if we're looking for what's missing, which is what we're doing with this method of anatomy and motion style investigative stuff, is she's missing extension in that hip. She's missing rotation of any variety, and she's missing abduction in that hip. And that's what we ought to see when she's in this moment in time here with her right leg back. And we can see there's none of this stuff is happening when it should. And this side bend to the right. So again, it comes back to me wanting to, from gait, I don't really get so many answers as I do further questions to follow up with. My big questions are like, dude, why? Why are you stuck with your body in a right suspension phase? What's preventing you from moving your pelvis left? How far back does that go? What's in your injury history? Repetitive activities that are asymmetrical in nature? Anyway, so let's move her to left mid stance, feet side by side. What's interesting is she doesn't kick herself in the foot on this side. So she's not crossing over her right leg so much. So suspension phase, and then does her pelvis level out? Oh, that's interesting. So she does kind of, in this suspension phase, her spine starts to straighten up a little bit. That right shoulder starts to come up a little bit more level. But again, notice how both arms are behind her. So to me, that points to a little bit more of an effortful way of getting her mass into her left leg. This is where she actually kind of gets into her pronation mechanics in her left hip. She's getting a bit of starting to hike up there. So that hiking, it's where we start to see some load in the lateral glutes. That helps us to absorb some shock and full weight bearing. And she's getting that happening a little bit too late in her stride. And we start to see actually that's where her body goes into that bend to the right. So she's still bent to the right, still bent to the right. There's where she starts to straighten up and begin to laterally flex left. But then, right away, you see how small that window she has for lateral flexion to the left. It's just not happening. And she goes right away, boom, back into that lateral flexion to the right. So if we think about SI joint, lower back crankiness, she's already from below kind of hiked up on the right, shifted to the right with her pelvis, but then from above, she's staying perpetually stuck, bent over that right side. So compressed and shortened through this whole area and then long through that left side. So she could have complaints on either side, one because it's not able to lengthen, and on the left side because she's unable to shorten the tissues and they might be already or constantly stuck long, except for like it's fascinating to me how small of a window of left lateral flexion she's in. Here's her peak. Oh man, it's so interesting how in this moment where actually she should be level with her pelvis, that's when she peaks in how much she's adducted into that right hip. Like the moment in time where we call it the leap of faith, where you would leave that leg and commit to the trustworthiness of the other leg. That's when she's like, no, no, we're staying in the right leg. And when she does finally get into that little bit of left lateral flexion, so small, you'll miss it. It's right there. Right there. And it's actually more of a shoulder, almost looking like the shoulders coming up and then boom, right back into the left lateral flexion. And almost like her body leads the way. Body goes right. And then her pelvis and her weight just almost leans to the right. So she's still not really shifting her pelvis to the right. And I wonder if that's because she's already shifted to the right. So there isn't really that much clean frontal plane pelvis shifting right and left. She's already there. And then it's almost like her torso is the thing that's providing the momentum to get back onto the right. But then nor can she leave the right to get to the left. Super intriguing. All right. I think we'll wrap that up there. And I guess, like I said, I have no answers to what's wrong, but I do have questions about her right hip. Can it adduct? Can it extend? Can it rotate? Can she actually laterally flex her spine to the left? And the real investigation is why. What's in her history? Either something on the left leg that is making it untrustworthy to commit her weight into? Or is there something structurally with her right hip? Because one thing I didn't say is that I believe she has hip dysplasia, and I can't remember if it's one hip or both hips from birth, I believe. So we'll need to confirm that because that definitely could have something to do with this. I hope that was useful. I'd be curious to see what observations that you have that I didn't pick up on. And maybe I will do a little bit of questioning with this lovely lady and get back to you with some answers.